My son stood at the top of the marble staircase inside his brand new mansion and looked down at me as if I were a stranger. "Mom, I think it's time you found somewhere else to live." The words hit harder than any slap. I stared at him. This was the boy I had carried for 9 months. The boy whose fever I stayed awake through for 3 nights straight when he was 7. The boy whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts for nearly a decade. And now he was asking me to leave. Not because I had done anything wrong. Not because he needed space. But because his wife thought I made the house look cheap. I wish I could tell you I argued. I wish I could tell you I screamed. Instead, I simply nodded. Then I reached into my purse and handed him a thin brown envelope. He barely looked at it. 6 days later, the bank would freeze every major asset he owned. 2 weeks later, that beautiful mansion would no longer belong to him. And for the first time in his life, my son would discover that the old woman he had thrown out wasn't a burden. She was the reason he had that house in the first place. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 67 years old. And this is the story of how my son learned the difference between success and gratitude. I wasn't born with money. I wasn't born with connections. I was born on a small farm outside Missouri where every dollar was earned through sweat. My father believed in hard work. My mother believed in sacrifice. Together they taught me that if you wanted something in life, you built it yourself. When I was 23, I married Daniel Carter. He was kind, funny, the type of man who could make strangers smile. For 12 wonderful years we built a life together. Then one rainy October night, a drunk driver crossed the center line. Daniel never made it home. I became a widow at 35 with a 9-year-old son named Michael. People always talk about grief. Nobody talks about the bills. Nobody talks about the fear. Nobody talks about sitting at a kitchen table at midnight trying to decide whether to pay the electric company or buy groceries. For years I worked. Every job I could find. I cleaned motel rooms, waited tables, packed boxes in warehouses, worked weekends at a grocery store. Anything that kept food on the table. Michael never knew how close we came to losing everything. I made sure of that. When his classmates went on school trips, somehow I found the money. When he needed a computer, I worked overtime. When he got accepted into college, I sold my wedding jewelry. Every sacrifice felt worth it because Michael was bright. Brilliant, actually. The kind of kid who could walk into a room and make people listen. I believed he would do something extraordinary. And he did. After college, he entered real estate development. Within 10 years, he was making more money in a month than I made in a year. I couldn't have been prouder. When people asked about my son, I glowed. "That's my boy," I would say. "He built that company himself." Of course, that wasn't entirely true. No one builds anything entirely by themselves. There are always hands beneath them. Hands lifting, supporting, protecting. Mothers know this better than anyone. The first time Michael introduced me to his future wife, I felt something I couldn't quite explain. Her name was Victoria. Beautiful, elegant, perfectly dressed. She shook my hand politely, but there was something behind her smile. Something cold. She looked around my small farmhouse during dinner. The faded curtains, the old furniture, the worn wooden floors. And every few minutes her eyes revealed what her mouth never said. This place wasn't good enough. Neither was I. First I ignored it. People from different backgrounds sometimes need time to adjust. I wanted to give her a chance. Then the comments started. Tiny little things. Easy to dismiss if you heard them one at a time. "Oh, Michael always talks about how humble his childhood was. What an adorable little house. Your accent is so authentic." Every sentence wrapped in a smile. Every smile hiding a knife. Michael never seemed to notice. Or maybe he chose not to. Love has a way of making intelligent people blind. They got married 18 months later. The wedding was beautiful, expensive, grand. Everything Victoria had dreamed about. I sat in the front row and cried when my son said his vows. At that moment, I believed we were becoming a family. I couldn't have been more wrong. The changes happened slowly. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. Birthdays turned into text messages. Holidays became complicated. Victoria always had another plan. Another event. Another reason they couldn't come. Still, I made excuses for them. Successful people are busy, I told myself. Young couples need space. Everything is fine. Then Michael bought the mansion. 3 stories. 8 bedrooms. Indoor pool. Private theater. The kind of house that appears in magazines. He insisted I come see it. Mom, you helped me get here, he said. You deserve to enjoy it too. I remember how proud he sounded. And for a moment I saw the little boy he used to be. The mansion sat on a hill overlooking nearly 40 acres. Beautiful land. Rolling fields. Tall oak trees. A view that stretched for miles. The second I saw it, something caught my attention. Not the house. The land. I knew that land. Better than anyone. Because 40 years earlier I had bought it myself. Back when nobody wanted it. Back when it was nothing more than forgotten farmland. A small investment. One of the smartest decisions I ever made. I said nothing. Because Michael had assured me all the legal paperwork was handled. Why wouldn't I believe my own son? Months passed. Then Victoria suggested something surprising. Why don't you move in with us for a while, Evelyn? The offer seemed genuine. Michael supported the idea immediately. I was getting older. The farmhouse required maintenance. Living closer to family sounded nice. So I agreed. For the first few weeks everything seemed perfect. Then little cracks began appearing. Victoria complained about my cooking, my television volume, the way I dressed, the friends who visited me. Every complaint sounded small. Together they became unbearable. Soon I realized something. Victoria didn't want me there. She never had. And one rainy Tuesday evening, she finally convinced my son of the same thing. I didn't know it yet. But the conversation that would change all our lives had already happened behind closed doors. 3 days later, Michael stood at the top of that marble staircase, looked down at me, and told me it was time to leave. What neither of them knew was that the brown envelope sitting unopened on the kitchen counter contained a secret powerful enough to destroy everything they thought they owned. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped softly against the massive windows behind Michael. The mansion felt strangely quiet, like it was holding its breath. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be, Michael said. Harder? I almost laughed. 30 years of sacrifice reduced to an inconvenience. I looked at my son carefully, really looked at him. The expensive watch, the tailored suit, the confidence, everything I had worked to give him. Yet somehow the kindness had gone missing. Did Victoria ask you to do this? His jaw tightened. That was answer enough. Mom, this isn't about Victoria. Of course it is. Because if it were truly about him, he would have looked ashamed. Instead, he looked uncomfortable. Like a man delivering bad news he didn't want responsibility for. Picked up my purse. When do you want me gone? The relief that flashed across his face hurt more than the words. As soon as possible. I nodded. Then I turned and walked upstairs to the guest suite. Not my room. The guest suite. That realization struck me suddenly. After living there for nearly 6 months, I still thought of it as the guest suite. Not home. Not family. Just a place I had been temporarily tolerated. I packed quietly. Few clothes. Photographs. Books. The little things that mattered. The expensive furniture wasn't mine. The giant television wasn't mine. The mansion wasn't mine. Or at least that's what everyone believed. An hour later I carried my bags downstairs. Victoria was waiting in the foyer. She wasn't even pretending to be sad. In fact, she looked relieved. Almost happy. You're leaving already? Her voice dripped with false concern. Michael thought it would be easier, I said. Well, change can be difficult at your age. At your age. I smiled. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes a smile is the only thing standing between dignity and humiliation. Michael carried my bags to the front door. The entire time, Victoria stood beside him like a queen watching servants work. When we reached my car, Michael finally spoke. Mom, don't be angry. I'm not angry. It was true. Anger requires surprise. By then I wasn't surprised anymore.
I'm disappointed.
His shoulders sagged. For a second I thought he might apologize. Instead he looked away. That told me everything. I handed him the brown envelope. What's this? Something you should read. He barely glanced at it. Then he tucked it under his arm. I'll look at it later. I nodded. You do that. Then I got into my car and drove away. Neither of them knew that later would be the most expensive mistake of their lives. The drive back to my farmhouse took nearly 2 hours. The entire way I kept remembering little things. Moments I had ignored. Excused. Forgiven. Victoria introducing me as Michael's elderly relative instead of his mother. The dinner party where she seated me with the catering staff. The fundraiser where she laughed when someone assumed I worked as housekeeping. Each memory felt different now. Clearer. Without love blurring the edges. By the time I reached home, darkness had fallen. The farmhouse looked exactly as I remembered. Simple. Quiet. Honest. For the first time in months I felt peaceful. The next morning I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My attorney. Harold Bennett. 72 years old. Sharp as a razor. One of the few people who knew every detail of my financial affairs. Evelyn. His voice sounded surprised. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need you to review something. That doesn't sound good. It isn't. 2 hours later he arrived carrying a leather briefcase. I explained everything. The mansion. The argument. Being asked to leave. The envelope. The land. Harold listened without interrupting. When I finished he sat quietly. Then he removed his glasses. Tell me something. When Michael built that house, did you ever sign a transfer agreement? I frowned. I don't think so. Think carefully. We spent the next hour searching through old files. Property records. Tax documents. Correspondence. Then we found it. The original deed. 40 acres. Purchased by Evelyn Carter in 1986. My name. Only my name. Harold's expression changed immediately. Interesting. What? He didn't answer. Instead he kept reading. Every page. Every document. Every filing. The silence stretched longer and longer. Finally he looked up. Evelyn, do you realize what this means? I had a feeling. But I needed to hear him say it. The land still belongs to you. My heart skipped. Are you sure? Absolutely sure. The house belongs to Michael's development company. The land underneath it belongs to you. I stared at him. That can't be possible. It happens more often than you'd think. People focus on buildings. They forget the ground they're standing on. A strange feeling settled over me. Not excitement. Not revenge. Something closer to disbelief. For years I had assumed everything was transferred correctly. Michael had handled most of the paperwork during construction. I trusted him completely. Apparently trust had replaced verification. Harold continued reviewing the documents. Then his face became serious. There's something else. What? The company used the property as collateral for several loans. I frowned. So if the land ownership isn't what the lenders believe it is, those loans could become very complicated. Complicated. Lawyers always use small words for big disasters. How complicated? Potentially catastrophic. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally I asked the question. What happens now? That depends on you. I walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the fields stretched beneath the afternoon sun. The same fields where Michael had learned to ride a bicycle. The same fields where he chased fireflies. The same fields where his father had carried him on his shoulders. I didn't want to hurt him. Despite everything. A mother's heart doesn't stop being a mother's heart. What would you do? Harold sighed. As your attorney? Or as your friend? Both. As your attorney, I'd immediately protect your interests. As your friend, he paused. I'd ask why your son thought he could throw away the person who helped build everything he has. That question stayed with me long after he left. 3 days passed. Then 4. No. Call from Michael. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. On the 6th day my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael. For a brief moment I smiled. Maybe he had finally opened the envelope. Maybe he had realized what he'd done. Maybe he wanted to make things right. I answered immediately. Hello, sweetheart. What came through the phone wasn't remorse. It was panic.
Pure panic.
Mom. His voice shook. The bank just froze our accounts. My smile disappeared. And before he could say another word, I knew exactly what had happened. He had finally opened the envelope. Mom. The bank just froze our accounts. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For a moment I didn't answer. Not because I was shocked. Because I knew this moment had been coming. What are you talking about? The bank says there's a problem with the property records. His breathing sounded uneven.
Fast.
Panicked. The confident businessman who had thrown me out of his mansion was gone. In his place was a frightened little boy. The same little boy who used to run to me whenever something broke. Mom, what did you do? There it was. Not what happened. Not can we talk. Not even I'm sorry. His first instinct was blame. I did nothing, Michael. Don't do that. The bank contacted every lender we work with. They're reviewing our loans. Investors are asking questions. What's going on? I looked out the kitchen window. The evening sun painted the fields gold. The same land everyone suddenly cared about. Did you read the entire envelope? Silence. That told me he hadn't. Michael had always been impatient. Even as a child. He wanted answers before understanding the question. Read it carefully. I already did. No. You skimmed it. There's a difference. His breathing grew heavier. Finally he spoke. The land belongs to you. Yes. How? I bought it 40 years ago. You knew that. His voice rose. Then why didn't you transfer it? I frowned. Because nobody asked me to. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time he was realizing the truth. The mistake wasn't mine. It was his. Or perhaps the people he trusted. Mom, there must be some misunderstanding. There isn't. The deed is valid. The records are valid. The taxes have always been paid. Everything is legal. I could almost hear his mind racing. Searching desperately for an escape. A loophole. A solution. There wasn't one. Not an easy one anyway. Can we meet? I considered it. Part of me wanted to say no. Part of me wanted him to feel exactly what abandonment felt like. But that's the difference between a mother and everyone else. Mothers keep loving even when they shouldn't. Tomorrow. Thank you. The relief in his voice was obvious. Then he added something that irritated me more than anything. Victoria wants to come too. Of course she does. The moment money was involved, she suddenly remembered I existed. The next afternoon they arrived together. For the first time since their wedding, they came to my farmhouse without being invited. Life has a sense of humor. Michael looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. Wrinkled suit. Constantly checking his phone. Victoria looked different too. Less polished. Less confident. Fear had replaced arrogance. They sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same kitchen where Michael had done homework as a child. The same kitchen where I once stretched $10 into a week's worth of meals. Neither spoke immediately. Finally Victoria broke the silence. Evelyn, surely we can work this out. Interesting. Not Mrs. Carter. Not Michael's mother. Not the old woman who embarrassed her. Now suddenly I was Evelyn. Friendly. Important. Useful. What exactly are we working out? She forced a smile. There appears to be a misunderstanding regarding ownership. No. There's no misunderstanding. Harold had prepared copies of every document. I slid them across the table. Purchase records. Tax records. County filings. Everything. Michael studied them silently. The longer he read, the paler he became. Victoria eventually grabbed the papers. Her expression changed immediately. This is impossible. No. It's inconvenient. There's a difference. She looked at Michael. You told me everything was handled. Michael looked stunned. I thought it was. You thought? Her voice sharpened. You thought? Suddenly they weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at each other. The perfect marriage was beginning to crack. And the sound was louder than either of them realized. The bank called me 3 times today, Michael said. 2 investors pulled out. The construction project in Dallas is suspended. My stomach tightened slightly. I hadn't expected the damage to spread that quickly. How bad is it? Very bad. He rubbed his face. Several loans used the mansion property as collateral. Once lenders discovered ownership questions, they triggered reviews. And if those loans are called in, we're in trouble. Real trouble.
Victoria interrupted.
That's why we're here. I almost laughed. No, that's not why you're here. You're here because you need something. The room fell silent. Neither argued, because both knew I was right. For years they needed nothing from me. The moment they did, here they were. Michael finally looked up. Mom, I made a mistake. The words sounded forced, like a businessman negotiating a contract, not a son apologizing to his mother. Did you? He blinked. What? Was the mistake the paperwork? Or throwing me out? His mouth opened, then closed. No answer. That was answer enough. Victoria leaned forward. Let's focus on solving the problem. Again, the problem. Not the betrayal. Not the humiliation. Not the months of disrespect. Just the money. Just the mansion. Just the assets. For the first time since they arrived, I felt anger. Real anger. Not loud anger. Not explosive anger. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. Do you know what hurts most? Neither responded. It's not being asked to leave. It's realizing neither of you expected consequences. Their eyes met mine. You believed I would simply disappear. You believed I had no value beyond sentimental memories. You believed everything beneath your feet already belonged to you. Nobody spoke, because every word was true. Victoria finally looked away. Michael stared at the table. For the first time in years he seemed ashamed. Good. Shame means a conscience is still alive. Then my phone rang. Harold. I answered. Hello? His voice sounded serious. Evelyn. You need to know something. I felt a chill. What is it? One of Michael's lenders filed an emergency legal action this morning. Michael shot upright. What? Harold continued. And that's not the worst part. There's now a formal investigation into several property disclosures. The color drained from Michael's face. How serious? Very serious. I slowly lowered the phone. The room had become completely silent. Outside, the wind rattled the old farmhouse windows. Inside, 3 people sat frozen. Because suddenly this wasn't just about a mansion. It wasn't even about money anymore. The problem had grown teeth. And it was coming for everything Michael had spent 15 years building, including things no amount of money could buy back. His reputation, his company, and perhaps even his future. For the first time since arriving, fear completely replaced pride in my son's eyes. And deep down I knew the worst was still ahead. Fear changes people. I've seen it happen countless times. Strong men become weak. Confident people become desperate. And those who once looked down on others suddenly start searching for help. As Michael and Victoria sat across from me, I saw that transformation happening in real time. The phone call from Harold had shaken them. Especially Michael. For years he had been the one solving problems, making deals, giving orders. Now he was facing a situation he couldn't control. And that terrified him. His voice was barely above a whisper. How bad can this get? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth was simple. None of us knew. Harold was still investigating. The banks were still investigating. The lawyers were still investigating. When powerful institutions start asking questions, answers rarely come quickly. Victoria crossed her arms. There has to be a solution. Of course there is. Every problem has a solution. The question is how expensive that solution becomes. She didn't like that answer. I could tell. People like Victoria spent most of their lives believing money could fix everything. This situation was teaching her a painful lesson. Sometimes money creates the problem. An hour later they left. Not because anything had been resolved. Because nothing had. As Michael walked toward the door he paused. Mom. I looked up. I'm sorry. For a brief second I wanted to believe him. I truly did. But something was missing. Not sincerity. Urgency. The apology had arrived only after the money disappeared. That matters. Actions reveal character. Timing reveals motives. I simply nodded. Drive safely. His face fell slightly. Perhaps he expected forgiveness. Perhaps he expected comfort. Instead he got honesty. The next morning everything exploded. I was drinking coffee when my television interrupted its regular programming. A local business report appeared on screen. A familiar image filled the television. Michael's mansion. My stomach tightened. The reporter stood outside the property. Behind her, cameras captured lawyers entering and leaving the front gate. Developing story this morning. Questions continue surrounding several real estate holdings connected to Carter Development Group. Industry insiders report lenders are reviewing multiple financial agreements following recently discovered property ownership discrepancies. Property ownership discrepancies. Such polite words. Television reporters have their own version of lawyer language. They make disasters sound professional. I watched silently. Then my phone started ringing. Friends, neighbors, former coworkers, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had questions. By noon the story had spread across social media. By evening it had become national business news. The company wasn't being accused of fraud. Not yet. But the uncertainty alone was enough. Investors hate uncertainty. Banks hate uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty. And uncertainty was everywhere. 3 days later Michael appeared at my farmhouse again. This time alone. The difference was obvious immediately. He looked exhausted. Not tired. Destroyed. His expensive confidence had vanished completely. May I come in? Of course. We sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally he broke the silence. Victoria moved into a hotel yesterday. I wasn't surprised. Why? He laughed bitterly. Because apparently none of this was part of her life plan. That answer told me more than he realized. How long have you been fighting? Weeks. His eyes lowered. Maybe longer. The truth often arrives slowly. Like dawn. You don't notice it until the darkness is already gone. Michael stared into his coffee. Do you know what investors asked me yesterday? What? Whether I inherited my success. I remained silent. He laughed again. A hollow sound. 15 years building a company. 15 years working every day. And suddenly people think maybe I didn't earn any of it. That hurt him. I could hear it. Not because the accusation was true. Because reputation had always mattered to him. Perhaps too much. He hesitated. Then continued. Were you ever proud of me? The question caught me completely off guard. For a moment I simply stared at him. All these years. All these sacrifices. And somehow he still didn't know. Every day of my life. His eyes filled with tears. Even after everything. Especially after everything. He looked away. The little boy was finally visible again. The little boy buried beneath money and success. I was so busy proving myself. He swallowed hard. I forgot who helped me get there. The room became quiet. Neither of us moved. Then Michael did something I hadn't seen him do since he was a child. He cried. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. The kind of crying that comes when pride finally collapses. I'm sorry, Mom. This time it sounded different. Not polished. Not strategic. Not convenient. Real. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then my phone rang. Harold. I answered immediately. Please tell me you have good news. The pause on the other end worried me. Actually, I do. I straightened. What happened? The lenders completed their review. Michael leaned forward instantly. And? Harold continued. Most of the concerns have been resolved. The property issue appears to be negligence, rather than intentional misconduct. Relief flooded across Michael's face. But Harold wasn't finished. There is one condition. My stomach tightened. What condition? The lenders want ownership clarified immediately. Meaning the land situation must be resolved permanently. I looked at Michael. He looked at me. Both of us understood exactly what that meant. The future of his company now depended on a single decision. Mine. After the call ended, silence filled the room again. Finally Michael spoke. What are you going to do? I looked around the farmhouse. The old photographs. The worn wooden cabinets. The memories. Then I thought about the mansion. The betrayal. The apology. Everything. For weeks everyone assumed this story was about revenge. It wasn't. Revenge is easy. Healing is hard. And at that moment I had to decide which path mattered more. Michael waited nervously. His future balanced on a single answer. I took a slow breath. Then I smiled. Because I already knew exactly what I was going to do. And it was something neither Michael nor Victoria would ever expect. Before you go, tell me what you think. Did Evelyn do the right thing by helping her son after everything he put her through? Or should she have walked away and let him face the consequences alone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read as many comments as I can, and I would love to hear your opinion. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful family story. And if you know someone who would relate to Evelyn's journey, share this video with them. Thank you for watching, and remember, success may build a house, but gratitude is what makes it a home.